Good morning. Once again, here we are on a Wednesday morning at Norma Talks, and I'm happy to have in my rooms people that are watching live, which is always nice. Gives me a sense of having an audience instead of just the screen. Where do I start? Last night, I had my sixth tarot class that I'm teaching of an 8-week course. And we're getting really into the meat of the symbology of how I teach it, which is that each suit, I should explain some things if you don't know anything about tarot. 78 picture cards known as the Unbound Book of Life, because each page can be turned in different ways that make different stories. It tells you the story of life. It tells you the story of how you are and how you're responding and what's happening and what's going on. And basically from these 78 symbols, 22 of them are what we call higher arcana cards. Some people call them majors. I like the word arcana because it means secret. So they're heavier secrets. They're more secrets. And the story they tell, when you look at them as a story and the evolvement of them, it's really, still find fascinating, actually. Then there are 4 suits. There are wands, which are your ideas. And this is by the way, these are all my interpretations that I originally got from a teacher, which I'll explain briefly in a minute. So wands are ideas, cups are your feelings, swords are the problems and challenges we have, and the pentacles are the material affairs that you can see, that you can put your hands on and know. So that in the 4 suits, they go from 1 to 10, and they tell a story of how we handle things like ideas and feelings and circumstances and life. And then we have what's called court cards. Court cards are the picture cards. They are the page, knight, queen, and king. Now, I was taught to look at these as attitudes of life, and I have found that they're incredibly different. And that's why I wanted to talk briefly about them today, as well as generally. What is the importance of tarot? I have taught classes in my way of thinking and my way of doing, and I've written books, which we'll talk about maybe a moment later, and people tell me, even though they don't go out and read cards for other people, it has probably been one of the best courses they ever took, because they still use it years and years later. Because it is a book that is not bound, because they are picture cards, and by how you learn how to read them, it is effective. The world opens up majestically. And that's why I and others can read for other people, because we're reading a story. We're telling a story. And I know I'm always saying to my students, remember, you're a storyteller. Because when they, what do I say? How do I link this symbol to that symbol? Well, you're joining words, just like in grammar. What are your joining words? How do you make that vibration match this vibration and then move on to another vibration? All of these things are part of what you learn and come to understand through reading for yourself every day. Now, that may seem funny, but we don't know ourselves until we get to see ourselves outside. And then we have to really think about, how come this particular symbol keeps coming up? How come I keep getting imagination symbols? How come I keep getting defensive symbols? How come I get whatever that I'm looking inside? How come I need to resolve some past issues? Those keep coming up. And as they keep coming up, they advise you where you need to look and what you need to relate and to deal with. And that is, to me, the most fun, even though sometimes it's a little startling when you realize you're not perfect. But then we begin to realize nobody is really perfect, because we're ourselves. And a lot of my other studies and that have come into what I teach as well, so that it becomes fun. But let's talk about the court cards, the attitudes, a little bit. There are pages. Now, pages are more the immature, usually get very caught up in things, except the page of swords, who is reactive. The element of the page really is about getting too tight into an area of thinking. We get absorbed. We get absorbed in our thoughts, or we get absorbed what's happening in life. We react to life, or we forget the bigger picture. So when we get page attitudes cards coming up, then usually easily changed. So, and because they're not really set like when we get to the kings. Now the knights are action. How are we acting? The Knight of Wands, always putting ideas into action and seems to be in command of that. The Knight of Cups, probably because I have favorites, which in a sense for me, the Knight of Cups is being able to go ahead in your life step by step by step, really in command of what's going on. The Knight of Swords is totally overreacting. Of course, we never do that, do we? We don't react. And so when we overreact, but you see, these are habits. When we talk about attitudes, they're habits. So these will start coming up if this is something you will tend to do over and over again. Like you tend to react to very fast, very quick. Some people have very quick retorts when they will feel defensive, and they will come back with verbal words. I don't have that ability. I didn't have to defend myself as a child that way. So I don't know. I have a friend that's incredible. I'm always amazed at how she always has an answer for everything. And when I asked her about it, she said, I had to survive in my family environment. And that's when I began to really understand how our environments also affect our attitudes of life as we move on. Now, the Pentacles is a procrastinator, and I'm going to, two more other symbols, I'm going to talk about procrastination, because that's a big one for people, especially right now when we can't do a lot of things, we'll tend to put things off. So the Knights are about action. Now, the Queens, I always point out, I still use the traditional Rider-Waite deck. Now, there is a lot of decks with some of them are beautiful, beautiful symbology. But because I follow the story that is in this particular deck, I like the old symbolism. First of all, it has what I call distance in it. So you can see a background, you can see the distance of where it's going and where it's heading. And when we look at the Queen, whoops, I jumped ahead of myself, apologies. This was created or published first in 1910, so that's over 100 years ago. And yes, they have some outdated mythology, and yes, some outdated thinking too, but we can accommodate that because we're really talking about behavior. They were way, way ahead. The people that created this, which was Arthur Edward Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith, were members of the Golden Dawn Order. They knew a lot about psychology, that's for sure, because it's all in here. Now, unfortunately, in this, I don't take the king or the queen in their quote sexes. I take it as the attitude, because all queens are a little off. They're not quite there where the kings are very set. Now, Queen of Wands is, I know very, very well, because it was me for many years, was allowing fear to sidetrack us from what we want to do. Now, the interesting thing is about fear, it convinces you shouldn't do that. You should do this. And that's usually, you might say, the easier road. I didn't feel like I was doing that, but when I look back in retrospect, I can see where I could have done more in my life than maybe I did, and I allowed the fear to dominate, perhaps. And rather than, oh, I don't think I can do that, so I won't do that. Now, the Queen of Cups is our imagination queen. Her cup looks nothing like a cup, and she's just really locked into whatever. She is also a procrastinator. So if the Knight of Pentacles and the Queen of Cups came up, you would have a procrastinator on your hands. Just a general rule, they would be procrastinating. Now, the Queen of Swords, because they have a lot to do with defensiveness, is very open, but also making sure that she's not going to be hurt, not going to be able to get in close. And the Queen of Pentacles actually is really about acceptance of what is and dealing with it. Sometimes in life, we can't have everything we want. Darn it all, but it seems to work that way. So we can get a lot of what we want, but sometimes we have to accept limitations. I know when I was writing about this in my first book, I put it, because I was a young mother, and I had to work, but it said that, this would be a position of a person accepting that, because it's a woman and I'm a woman, this is how I wrote it, something like this, that you would accept that you had to stay home with your young children rather than maybe go to work that you would prefer. So there's always a little limitation there in the Queen. Kings. Kings are very set in whatever. Now, the King of Wands, now I'm going to tell you a story about the King of Wands. When I first set out reading, you know, I was quite young. I was just over 30 when I became professional when I was first. And I was reading in a bookstore, and I was getting a number of professional people coming in. And because readers weren't that perfect, there weren't a lot of us at that time. And they would come in, and anyway, they would pull up this card of the King of Wands. And I would expect them to be really successful. And I'll tell you what, the King of Wands is able to look into the distance, is able to look ahead and can see. Now, I don't know, I'm short-sighted. I was short-sighted and still short-sighted. And so it's a little difficult for me to look way down the road naturally. I'm not a fast seer that way. The King of Wands is. And I couldn't figure out why these men in particular at that time were not being as successful as I figured they would be with this particular symbol. So what I did was meditate on the card. And that's what I often over the years did when I couldn't quite figure out something. I would meditate on the card and figure it out. What it told me was this: they are fast seers. And because they're fast seers, they see all the things that can go wrong. And so they procrastinate. They don't go forward. Now, I began to realize as time went by, when there is something and you see these obstacles, two things can happen. One is that the obstacle is not there, but mostly is that your pathway that you're on goes around it or goes in a different direction, so you don't have to deal with that obstacle. Or by the time you get there, your knowledge base is included so that you actually can handle and deal with it quite easily. And that was the one thing that I found. So we have those three symbols that represent procrastination: Knight of Pentacles, Queen of Wands, Queen of Cups, and King of Wands. Gosh, sorry, I'm messing up the thing. So I'm going to see that again. 3. Knight of Pentacles, Queen of Cups, King of Wands. Any two of those in any reading you're doing, you know you're dealing with a procrastinator for absolute sure. Now, the King of Cups is a very different story. It took me a long time to figure this one out, because he's in a concrete throne on a sea. Now, the cups deal with feelings and emotions. So it's like, okay, there's the sea of emotions, and it shows that he's in supremacy of them. But it finally came to me is that although he buries them, he pulls them down, he's not really in tune with them. And consequently, he's the master of them by suppressing them. And that creates other problems. So it's very often what other symbols are around that as to how he's doing. Sometimes I also find that person can be a little arrogant in how they feel about everything, because that's who they are. They got to have this persona that they've got everything in hand. So it comes across a little arrogant. The King of Wands. Sorry, I'm messing this up again. I've got symbols in front of me and I still can't say them right. The King of Swords. Now, I came to like the King of Swords because of this. When you look at this symbol, the way it's drawn in this deck, the sword tilts off it's in his right hand, it tilts off to the right. It's obviously is quite severe, but in the sky, there are two birds. Now, number 2 is that in the higher arcana is a high priestess, which is to deals with choice. This person I found is open to intellectual talk. If I have this symbol in a reading, or that it came up at any point of time, I do not use emotional words at all, because right away that sword's going to come right up here and it's not going to let you in. If you can approach them in an intellectual way, they open right up. And that's the beauty of this, is there it's an intellect, and it is to me the element of air, which is the intellect, and it's very definitely in the King, is that you must approach intellectually. They don't understand emotion, they don't want to know about emotion, they just want to know facts and figures. And usually, of course, it's just not the one symbol, but if it's there, and especially if it's with the Emperor, which is number 4 in the high arcana, which is stubborn and set, and then and doubtful, then then you really do have to be very, very intellectual about anything that you say. But I've come to warm up to him over the years. Now, the King of Pentacles has kind of got it together. He's in his castle, which means he's attained. He's got all his emotional or problems solved. He's in command. He's also ready to utilize his energy and force in his life. One of the keys that I like when I'm teaching this particular symbol is his crown is made of roses and lilies. And if you're a student of tarot and you're looking at the Magician, the bottom part of the card is roses and lilies, which is the red roses of desire, white roses of pure thought, create aspiration, you're aspiring. And also the laurel wreath of victory is also on his crown. So it's like, this is the state that we want to be in, where we're in command of most of the situations of our life easily. So by knowing what these attitudes are, and as I said, I was going to explain why they're habits. Now I just have to pull in a little bit of my knowledge of my past life information. What I discovered was that from the time we're conceived, anytime that we have a feeling, we reach back in our memory banks and we remake a decision of the last time we experienced that feeling. So from conception up, all our first time we had a feeling, our other lifetimes. I won't just say past lives. That's what I've dealt with mostly, but it can be other lives, it can be future lives as well. So what happens then, we just keep repeating the pattern. And that's why our habits of response come into play. That's why the attitudes are so important when you're reading for a person, because this is how they respond the most often. There are habits, and the habits are in the subconscious. And this is where we've got to become aware. That's why a lot of things I've talked about, creating an observer to watch your thoughts, to watch how you respond, to watch how you do, so that you're more effective in the direction. Now, in my life, this time around, I've written several books, but 3 of them on the tarot. And my first one was called Tarot for Successful Living, a very basic book. And then I wrote a more extensive book called Exploring the Patterns of the Tarot. And most of the people I know that have that book really, really have enjoyed it and liked it. And then what I did is I combined the first 2 with some other information for a book that I have a PDF copy that I do mail out to people, that called Pathways of the Tarot. The High Priestess is on the front for a reason, because you have a choice of whether to move through the paths of your life or not. You can sit still and be nowhere, or you can learn about what's going on inside you, around you, to you, and how you respond. How you respond is one of the most important elements of life, and how you respond are your habits. Think about it. Mostly we don't think. So we don't recognize that we have habits that we respond. I used to shrink a lot when people said something. So that was my defensive mechanism, was to shrink, to go away. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't raised in a house. I was raised in a very quiet household. I basically had an absentee father. He worked. So when he was home, it was his boss. But basically, I didn't have to fight for myself. Although with my dad, that's a different story. I had some stuff with my dad, which I sorted out. But it's like, your basic life has already been created. Now, what I found also when I was working with what I call inner programs, most of our basic programming is in place by 2.5 years old. So you may attempt to work at changing and transforming things to be different, but you've got to also be aware that a lot of this stuff happened very, very early. So it's very important to look at your habits of response. Are they effective for you? You may feel they are perfectly effective for you. Not a problem. You may find that they are not perfect for you. So that's where my energy transformation work began to come into play. I used to do inner child, which I call frozen emotional children, and unfreezing those parts where we blocked, and we're still 7 when we're 70 or something. But then it came in, and began to change. Jen began to change. And actually, one of the people that is in my room watching this right now was an important part of that, because I was on a holiday and I was close where she was living, and she came down and we spent the whole day playing with the pendulum, looking at 4 different things that aid and work with your life. And she had just taken, believe she had taken a course, the old Ponopono course. Anyway, that was the beginning of me creating what I do today. That was quite a lot of years ago now, but slowly and surely things began to fall into place, and I couldn't let it go. It kept coming up and kept coming up. So I have to thank my friend for that, because that put me on this path that opened up so many different avenues around growth and who we are and what we do and what's next. It's been a really big, long journey for me from that point of time. So we're never just stuck. And that's what, and also all the way through, tarot has been it's my tool. It's my tool, not only for myself, but for many others. It explains where I am, and I may not like what it tells me sometimes, but it keeps me aware, and it keeps me up to date. And I am so privileged to be able to read for other people, to help them understand where they are, and also advise if they want to change things at all, what they can do or what they can create in doing. So I think on that note, I'm going to say thank you for listening. Thank you for this scrambled journey a little bit. Sorry I messed up what was what there for a bit. That's unusual for me, but I did it, and that shows again, not all of us are perfect all the time. But thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for liking, and especially for seeing I am tired. I have to admit, I am tired. And so my brain is not as quick as it needs to be. But I thank you for everything, whatever you've done in relation to my channel and the comments, which do come in. And I will be back on Sunday for a Sunday Thought. Trustingly not as tired today. And I will also be back next Wednesday with another topic. So bless you and thank you. And I look forward to speaking with you again. Bye now.